The morning began quietly, wrapped in soft rain and the faint smell of coffee drifting through the house. Claire Matthews loved mornings like this. The world outside her Oregon home felt calm for once. It was one of those rare days when she didn't have to rush to meetings, answer emails, or juggle too many tasks at once. Her teenage son, Ethan, was still upstairs, and the house was still enough for her to finally breathe. She went into the bathroom, craving a few minutes of peace. The warm steam filled the air as she turned on the shower, and for a brief moment, she closed her eyes, letting the sound of falling water wash away the weight she'd been carrying. Since losing her husband Daniel almost 10 years ago, peace had been something she had to fight for. Raising Ethan alone had been both her greatest strength and her quietest sorrow. Every decision, every challenge, every lonely night she had faced it all while keeping a brave face. But this morning felt different. Maybe it was the rain. Maybe it was the way the world seemed slower. Or maybe it was the small ache in her chest that had been whispering lately, an ache that told her something. It told her something. She reached for her towel when suddenly there was a soft knock on the bathroom door. "Mom." Ethan's voice came through, low and unsure. Claire blinked, surprised. Ethan was usually the type to keep to himself, especially since he had started high school. He had that quiet teenage independence, kind and respectful, but distant in the way most 17-year-olds are. For him to knock like that early in the morning, it meant something was wrong, or at least unusual. "Yes, honey. What's wrong?" she asked, her voice echoing lightly through the bathroom. There was a pause on the other side of the door. "Can I talk to you for a second?" Something in his tone made her heart skip. It wasn't panic, but there was weight in his voice, something careful. Something that said he wasn't sure how she'd react. She grabbed her robe, quickly tied it, opened the door just a little. Ethan stood there in the hallway, hair messy, face serious, holding something in his hands. For a moment, Claire's mind raced. Had something happened at school? Did he break something? But then she saw it. In his hands was a small photo frame, wooden, old, with a faint crack along the glass. Inside was a picture Claire hadn't seen in years. Her and Daniel standing on the front porch, smiling like time had never meant to move forward. Daniel's arm was around her, his eyes bright, full of the warmth that had drawn her to him all those years ago. Her breath caught. Where did you get that?" she asked softly. "I found it in the attic," Ethan said, looking down at the photo like it was something sacred. "I was trying to find my baseball glove. And this was in an old box. There was also something else." He reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled out a yellowed envelope. The edges were frayed, but the writing on the front was clear. "To Claire, if you ever need me again." Her stomach turned. The handwriting was unmistakable Daniel's. Claire froze in the doorway. For years, she had gone through every drawer, every box, trying to find traces of him after the accident. There had been pictures, old notes, but never a letter. Never something like this. Ethan looked worried. "Mom, are you okay?" She blinked, coming back to herself. I don't know. I just didn't expect." Her voice broke slightly, and she pressed a hand to her mouth, trying to steady her breath. Ethan stepped closer. "I didn't read it. I thought it should be yours." His thoughtfulness, his calmness, the maturity in his tone, it struck her deeply. For so long she'd seen Ethan as her reason to stay strong. But now, in that hallway, she saw the young man he was becoming. The one who carried his father's steadiness in his eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, taking the envelope carefully from his hand, as though it might crumble. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of rain outside filled the silence between them. It wasn't uncomfortable, it was heavy, but in a way that felt meaningful. There was something sacred about that quiet, as if Daniel himself was standing just beyond it, waiting for her to open what he had left behind. "Do you want me to give you space?" Ethan asked after a while, his voice gentle. Claire looked at him, her son, the only piece of Daniel she had left in the world, and shook her head. "No, maybe this was meant for both of us." He nodded, and for the first time in a long while, they shared a look that said everything. Words couldn't. Understanding, love. The quiet bond between two people who had survived the same heartbreak in their own ways. Claire stepped out of the bathroom, the robe still tied loosely around her, the envelope clutched tightly in her hand. The hallway felt colder than before, but also somehow alive. She looked down at the envelope again, running her fingers over the faded ink. Daniel had always been the type to leave small notes sweet, thoughtful, often tucked inside her sketchbook or taped to her coffee mug before he left for work. "You make the world brighter," one had said. Another, "Don't forget to smile, sunshine." But this was different. This was his voice reaching through time, through loss, through the space between their worlds. She walked downstairs, Ethan following silently behind her. They sat together on the couch, the photo resting on the coffee table between them. The sound of rain was steady, rhythmic. It's like a heartbeat in the background. For a few seconds, Claire just stared at Daniel's handwriting, afraid to open it. What if it hurt? What if it brought everything back? But what if it healed something she didn't even know was still broken? "Do you want me to read it with you?" Ethan asked quietly. She smiled faintly. "Yes, I think your dad would want that." And in that small, warm living room, the same one that had seen laughter, grief, and silence, they prepared to read the words of the man who had once been the center of their world. Claire's hands trembled as she tore open the seal. The paper was fragile, but his handwriting was clear and strong, as if even time couldn't fade his love. Her eyes scanned the first few words, and though she didn't read them aloud yet, tears welled up instantly. She placed her other hand over Ethan's. "Your dad always knew how to find the right words," she said softly. Ethan squeezed her hand. "Then maybe this is one of them." As the rain fell harder outside, Claire realized something she hadn't in years. Sometimes healing doesn't come with grand moments or miracles. Sometimes it begins with something as simple as a knock on a door and a voice that says, "Mom, I need to talk to you." And in that moment, she knew life was about to change again. Not through loss this time, but through rediscovery. What waited inside that letter would soon unfold everything they both needed to hear. But for now, all Claire could do was hold her breath and listen to the rain, wondering if this was Daniel's way of reaching back, reminding her that love never truly disappears, just finds new ways to return. The rain still whispered outside as Claire held the letter in her trembling hands. The house felt different now, quiet, but not empty. It was the kind of silence that came before something important. Ethan sat beside her, his eyes filled with curiosity and concern. The photo of his parents still rested on the table between them, a silent reminder of the love that once filled this home. Claire hesitated for a moment. She had spent years trying to move on, pretending that she was fine, convincing herself that grief was something that faded over time. But now, with this letter in her hands, it all came rushing back. Every memory, every laugh. Every night she'd cried quietly so Ethan wouldn't hear it all pressed down on her. Like the weight of a forgotten past suddenly remembered. "Mom," Ethan said softly, "it's okay. You can read it when you're ready." Claire nodded, wiped her tears, and carefully unfolded the paper. The handwriting was strong and familiar, curved in the same confident strokes she used to see on sticky notes around the house. For a moment, she just stared at the words before beginning to read aloud. "My dearest Claire, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it back." The words hit her like a wave. She felt her breath catch, and her hands shook slightly. Ethan reached over, quietly placing his hand over hers. She continued reading, her voice soft but steady. "I want you to know that I wasn't afraid when I left. The only thing I feared was leaving you and Ethan behind. I don't want this letter to make you sad. I wanted to remind you of how much you were loved and how proud I am of the life we built together." Tears slid down Claire's cheeks, but she didn't stop reading. She felt Daniel's presence in every line, every word written with love and care. It was as if he was sitting right there beside her, speaking through time, through paper and ink. "Promise me you won't close your heart. I know you'll miss Mile, miss you too, more than you'll ever know, but life is still waiting for you. There will be days when you laugh again, even when you think you can't. Let yourself." It doesn't mean you've forgotten Mint, means you're alive. Claire paused, pressing the letter against her chest. For years she had felt guilty every time she smiled or found a moment of peace. But now, hearing Daniel's words telling her it was okay, it broke something open inside her. Ethan was silent. But his eyes glistened. He knew, didn't he? He knew you'd keep holding on. She nodded slowly. He always knew me better than I knew myself. She looked back at the letter and continued reading. Tell Ethan that I love him. Tell him to chase life, not fear it. Tell him that no matter where he goes, I'll be proud of him. And Claire, when he's old enough, tell him about that night we danced in the kitchen with no music. That's the memory I want him to keep of us. That laughter, that love that was our best moment. Claire smiled through her tears. She remembered that night vividly. It was late. The radio had broken. And they had no music. But Daniel had pulled her close and swayed with her anyway, whispering the words of the song they both loved. She had laughed so hard her stomach hurt, and Daniel had kissed her forehead, saying, "We don't need music. You're enough." That memory, buried deep beneath years of grief, now returned like sunlight breaking through clouds. She finished the last few lines. So if you ever find this, promise me this you'll live again. You'll open the curtains, let the sun in, and remember that love doesn't die. It changes form, that's all. I'll always be with you in the laughter of our son, in the quiet mornings, and in the way you keep moving forward. Always yours, Daniel. When she finished reading, Claire couldn't speak. The words hung in the air, soft and heavy. Ethan looked at her, unsure of what to say. He was used to seeing his mother strong and composed, but this was different. This was raw, real. "Mom," he said quietly, "he wrote that for you. But I think he wrote it for me too." Claire turned to him, her heart aching in the best way. "He did, sweetheart. He wanted us both to live, not just survive." Ethan nodded slowly, his eyes glancing at the photo on the table. "I think he'd be happy with us. Even if things aren't perfect, we've made it this far." Claire took a deep breath. For the first time in years, she didn't feel that crushing emptiness inside her chest. Instead, she felt warmth, grief mixed with love, sadness mixed with peace. Daniel's letter had done something she didn't expect, had healed something that words had never been able to reach before. She placed the letter back into the envelope, smoothing it carefully. "We should keep it somewhere safe," she said. "Not to hide it, but to remind us." Ethan smiled faintly, like a promise. "Yes," she said, smiling through her tears. "A promise to live." The rain outside began to fade, replaced by soft sunlight breaking through the clouds. The golden light filled the living room, and for a moment felt almost like a quiet message that Daniel was still watching over them. Claire stood up and walked toward the window. Drops of water still clung to the glass, glimmering like tiny diamonds. She thought about everything Daniel had written. How he had known her so deeply, how he had somehow prepared her for the day she'd have to live without him. And now, 10 years later, it was as if his words had found their way back right when she needed them most. Behind her, Ethan spoke again. "Mom, you know what I think?" She turned to him, smiling softly. "What?" "I think Dad would want us to go somewhere. Like one of those places you two used to visit, maybe? Maybe it's time we start making new memories too." His words hit her gently, but deeply. New memories. The thought scared her, but also filled her with hope. "That sounds perfect," she said quietly. Ethan grinned, relief flickering in his eyes. For the first time in a long while, they both felt something neither of them had dared to feel: peace. Later that day, Claire placed the letter in a wooden box and kept it on the mantel. It wasn't just a memory. It was a reminder that love doesn't end with goodbye. It transforms, just like Daniel said. That night, as the sky darkened, Claire stood by the window again. She could almost feel Daniel's presence, warm, steady, like the faint touch of someone standing just behind her. She whispered, "Thank you," into the quiet air. And somewhere in her heart, she felt an answer not in words, but in the calm that filled her. From that moment on, she knew this letter wasn't meant to reopen old wounds. It was meant to guide her forward, to remind her that even after loss, life still waits. And though Daniel was gone, his love was still here, alive in every beat of her heart, and in the son they had raised together. That morning, Ethan had knocked on her door. He didn't know it then, but that small, simple act had changed everything. It had opened not just a door but a path back to life. The weeks after finding Daniel's letter felt like the world had shifted in quiet, invisible ways. The sadness that had lived in Claire's chest for years was still there, but it wasn't heavy anymore. It had changed into something softer, something that reminded her she was still alive. Every morning she opened the curtains a little wider. She made coffee and actually tasted it. She smiled when she passed old photos, not because the pain was gone, but because the love behind them finally felt warm again. Ethan noticed the change first. His mom was laughing again, humming as she cooked, painting at her little corner desk like she used to when he was a kid. For years, her paints had sat untouched, gathering dust. But now the table was alive with color again, blues, golds, and warm tones that looked like light breaking through clouds. One afternoon, Claire stood by the window, a brush in her hand, lost in thought as the Oregon sky glowed with soft gray light. She was painting a small house under the Reina, familiar Sean Butt this time. There was a bright window in the center, glowing like hope. She didn't even realize how symbolic it was. That's when a gentle knock came at the front door. She wiped her hands on a cloth and opened it to find Mark Turner, their neighbor. He was a few years older than her, tall with kind eyes and a calm voice. Mark had lived next door for as long as Claire could remember. He had helped with repairs, shoveled snow in winter, and checked in on her and Ethan after Daniel's accident. He was the kind of man who never asked for anything but was always there when needed. "Hey, Claire," he said, holding a small bag. "You mentioned last week your coffee machine was acting up, so I brought some beans from the shop I go to. Maybe fresh coffee can convince it to behave." Claire smiled, warmth touching her face. "You didn't have to do that, Mark." "I wanted to," he said simply, his eyes kind. "Besides, you look like someone who's finally breathing again. That deserves good coffee." She laughed softly, a sound she hadn't realized she'd missed making. "Come in, I'll test them right now." Inside, the air smelled of paint and cinnamon. Mark looked around at the art scattered across the room, some unfinished, some full of life. "You've been painting again," he said. Claire nodded, pouring water into the kettle. "I found something that reminded me of who I used to be. Or maybe who I still am." Mark didn't press. He just smiled, understanding more than words could say. They had both known Losmark's wife had passed away years ago. That silent understanding between them didn't need to be spoken. It just existed quietly. As the coffee brewed, Ethan came downstairs. He paused when he saw Mark and smiled politely. "Hey, Mr. Turner." "Hey, champ," Mark replied. "Your mom's coffee machine is in trouble again, so I brought back up." Ethan chuckled. "That thing's been half broken since I was 12. Claire shook her head with a playful sigh. "You two are never going to let me live that down, are you?" They all laughed, and for a moment it felt natural, like a scene from a life that had once been whole. There was no awkwardness, no forced cheer. Just this simple warmth of human connection. After Mark left, Ethan turned to his mom. "You like him, don't you?" he asked, half teasing, half serious. Claire's face softened. "He's kind. That's all," Ethan grinned. "You deserve kind." His words hit her deeper than he knew. That night, as she cleaned her brushes, she thought about Mark. His patience, his calmness, the quiet way he filled the room without trying to fix anything. She hadn't realized how much she missed that feeling, having someone simply be there. Without needing to fill the silence, days passed and their paths kept crossing. Mark would stop by to return a borrowed book, help fix a loose window latch, or bring groceries when it rained. Claire started to lose care to admit. There was something safe in his company. One afternoon, she invited him to see her studio. "It's a mess," she warned with a laugh. "I doubt that," he said, stepping inside. The small room smelled of paint and turpentine. Canvases leaned against the walls, each one a story waiting to be told. "You're really talented, Claire. These paintings, they have heart." She blushed slightly, shaking her head. "I don't know. I used to paint for Daniel. He always said my work had too much emotion, too much life. I stopped after he passed." Mark studied one painting a storm over a quiet sea, with a faint light on the horizon. "Looks to me like you never really stopped. You just needed the right reason to start again." His words lingered in her mind long after he left. That night, as the house grew quiet, Claire found herself sitting on the couch with Ethan. They watched an old movie together, one Daniel used to love. Halfway through, Ethan leaned against her shoulder and said, "I like seeing you happy again, Mom. Dad would too." She kissed the top of his head. "You think so?" "I know so," he said, smiling softly. Something in his voice reminded her of Daniel's strengths. The same steady tone, the same warmth. For the first time, Claire felt that her life wasn't split between before and after. It was all part of one journey: pain, love, loss, and healing, woven together into something whole. The next morning, Claire walked outside with her coffee, watching the sunrise paint the sky in pink and gold. Mark was in his yard fixing a fence. He looked up, caught her eye, and smiled. She smiled back, holding her mug a little tighter. "Morning," he called out. "Morning," she replied. He walked over, wiping his hands. "You ever think of selling your paintings?" "Not really," she said, shrugging. "Why?" "Because I think people need to see them. They're full of hope." His words stayed with her all day. Maybe he was right. Maybe it was time to share her art again, to share her story. Even the painful parts. Because maybe someone else out there needed to be reminded that love could survive loss. Later that week, Claire found herself setting up a small display at the local art fair. Mark helped her carry the canvases while Ethan helped arrange them. As people walked by, admiring her work, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: purpose. One woman stopped and asked, "What inspired these?" Claire smiled gently. "Memories. And second chances." When the fair ended, Mark walked her home. The street was quiet, bathed in the soft light of evening. "You did amazing today," he said. "I was terrified," she admitted. "You didn't look it," he replied, smiling. "You looked like someone who finally remembered how to live." Claire looked at him, then really looked, and something shifted inside her. It wasn't a spark of sudden romance. It was deeper, slower, something that came from understanding. From two hearts that had both known loss and learned how to breathe again. That night, as she lay in bed, Claire thought about how far she had come from the knock on the bathroom door to finding Daniel's letter. To this quiet sense of peace. Life hadn't given her back what she lost, but it had given her something just as precious: the courage to begin again. And as she drifted to sleep, she realized Daniel had been right all along. Love doesn't die. It just finds new ways to keep living. Months passed, and life in the small Oregon town slowly settled into a new rhythm. Claire no longer moved through her days with that quiet ache she used to carry. The house that once felt too big, too empty, now felt alive again with laughter, warmth, and something she hadn't dared to believe in for years: peace. Every morning, sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, catching the faint glimmer of paintbrushes soaking in a jar by the sink. Claire would hum softly while making breakfast, the smell of toast and fresh coffee drifting through the air. Ethan usually joined her a few minutes later, still half asleep but smiling, always asking, "What's the plan for today, Mom?" And sometimes, when the weekend came, Mark Turner would stop by. He'd knock lightly on the door, coffee in hand, and ask if she needed help fixing something or if she wanted to take a walk. At first, their meetings had felt cautious to people learning how to exist in the same space without letting old grief cast shadows. But now their connection had deepened into something simple and honest. Mark had become part of their life. He didn't try to fill Daniel's place. He respected the love that came before, but he added something new: stability, warmth, a steady kindness that slowly changed the air in the house. One evening, after dinner, Claire found herself sitting in the living room with Ethan and Mark. The fire crackled softly. painting the walls in orange light. Ethan was showing Mark some photos from a school project, and Mark listened with genuine interest, nodding and smiling in all the right places. Claire sat back quietly, watching the two of them. For the first time, she realized how naturally Mark had fit into their small family. It wasn't forced, it was gentle, like the world had been preparing them all for this moment. Later that night, after Ethan went upstairs, Mark stayed behind to help Claire clear the table. As they worked side by side, their hands brushed when they both reached for the same plate. Neither pulled away immediately. It wasn't awkwardette, was quiet, meaningful. "Thank you," she said softly, breaking the silence. "For what?" "For being here. For not pushing, for just showing up." Mark looked at her with that calm, steady gaze. "You don't need to thank me for that, Claire. Sometimes being there is the only thing that really matters." Something about his words hit her deeply. It reminded her of Daniel's letter, how he had told her to live again, to find happiness without guilt. She realized she wasn't betraying the past by caring about someone new. She was honoring it by allowing herself to move forward. The weeks turned into months. Claire's art began to attract attention. People started buying her paintings from local fairs. She even got an invitation to display her work in a small gallery in Portland. When she told Mark and Ethan, their reactions were pure pride. "You're finally sharing what's been inside you all along," Mark said, smiling. Ethan grinned. "I told you people would love your work, Mom." On the day of the exhibit, Claire stood in front of her collection, each painting a reflection of her journey. One canvas showed a rainy day with a small house in the distance, a glowing window in the middle. Another showed two figures dancing in a kitchen surrounded by soft light. And then there was the final one, a letter resting on a wooden table. Sunlight falling across it, with a faint outline of a hand above it. People stopped and stared. Many asked about the meaning behind it. Claire simply said, "It's about finding messages from the past that still guide you today." As the night ended, Mark found her standing by the last painting, lost in thought. "He'd be proud of you, Claire," he said gently. She smiled, her voice soft. "I hope so. I think he helped me find my way back." When they drove home, Ethan was half asleep in the back seat, and the quiet hum of the car filled the night. Mark glanced over at Claire, her profile lit by passing streetlights. "Do you ever wonder," he asked, "how life decides when to give us second chances?" Claire looked out the window, the reflection of the stars catching in her eyes. "All the time," she said. "Sometimes I think it starts with something small or knock, a moment, a choice. You never realize it's changing your life until later." Mark nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe that's what makes it special." When they reached home, Mark helped her carry a few things inside. At the door there was a pause, the kind that feels heavier than silence, yet not uncomfortable. Claire looked at him, her heart calm but full. "Mark," she said quietly, "you've brought something back into my life I thought I'd lost for good." He smiled gently. "You just needed someone to remind you it was still there." That night, after he left, Claire stood alone in the hallway. Her eyes drifted toward the bathroom, the same door where, months ago, everything had begun. That small knock, that hesitant voice of her son had been such an ordinary moment. Yet it changed the course of her life completely. She walked closer, touched the wooden frame, and smiled to herself. If Ethan hadn't knocked that morning, she would never have found Daniel's letter. She might have kept living quietly, painting over her grief without ever healing it. That one small moment had led her to rediscover her strength, her art, and even her capacity to love again. It was strange how life worked that way, how the smallest actions could lead to the biggest transformations. Ethan came down the stairs then, his hair messy, eyes tired but warm. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked with a smile. He shrugged. "Just thinking. About Dad, about you, about everything." Claire sat on the couch and he joined her. "You know," she said softly, "your dad once told me love doesn't disappear, just changes shape." Ethan leaned against her shoulder. "I think he was right." "I think so too," she whispered, resting her hand on his. They sat there for a long while, the house filled with quiet comfort. The rain had stopped outside, replaced by the soft hum of night. Claire felt peaceful, like she had finally reached the other side of something long and painful. The next morning, sunlight poured through the curtains, golden and warm. Mark stopped by with breakfast, and Ethan greeted him with a grin. It wasn't awkward or uncertain anymore. It was normal, like he belonged there. As they all sat around the table, laughter and soft conversation filled the air. And somewhere deep inside, Claire felt Daniel's presence not as a ghost of sorrow, but as a memory of love that would always guide her. Later, as she stood by the window, watching the sky bloom with color, she thought about everything that had happened. One small knock, a letter from the past. A neighbor's quiet kindness hit had all come together to remind her of one simple truth. Life doesn't wait for us to be ready. It just asks us to open the door when it knocks. That thought made her smile. Because now, when she looked at her life, the laughter, the art, the people she loved, she didn't see what she had lost anymore. She saw what she had found. And though she would always wonder how that one morning had changed everything, she didn't need all the answers. Some moments, she realized, are meant to be mysteries beautiful. Gentle reminders that love, in all its forms, always finds its way home.